Okay, team, we got another great question of the week. This one was from Jocelyn Jacobs at our main office. Mainly what she is asking is about the compensation again when you're representing a buyer. So if you have a buyer broker agreement and the buyers agreed to pay you 3%, but the seller or the seller's broker is offering 2.5%, how do you proceed forward with that without having to alter it later? That is a great question, and we get that a lot. The offer of compensation agreement can be submitted prior to sending over your offer. So you would fill in what either you were entitled to from your buyer, or if the listing broker has told you what they're offering, you can put in the 2.5, 3 ahead of time. Now, remember, it's all negotiable with your buyer. So if you have 3 in there and you're willing to take the 2.5, we can modify that. Or we can ask the seller to pay the difference or the seller's broker, or we can ask the buyer to pay it. So remember, the offer of compensation can be signed prior to submitting the offer, and it is between the brokers, not the buyer and seller. That form is CABB-1. Or, this is interesting, and another new form as of September. If you don't know the amount being offered, or if you want to ask for more, negotiate it up, you can attach the buyer broker's compensation contingency, which gives the buyer the right to cancel the contract so as not to bind them to paying the compensation or anything above what was agreed upon. Okay, we're going to attach all these forms, but I'm going to read you a little snippet from that one. Remember, it came out towards the end of September, so it's fairly new. This contract is contingent upon, and you would check one, the seller's broker and buyer's broker, or seller and buyer's broker, executing a compensation agreement with terms acceptable to the buyer. And then it goes on to give your time frames and when they have to submit it. And if it is not acceptable to the buyer, in other words, you were getting 2 and the buyer was bound to pay you 3, the buyer has the right to cancel. So we're going to attach these forms, but this one is BBCCA-1. So there are 2 forms that you now can use. You can ask for it up front, or you can make it contingent on a compensation being executed that is agreeable to your buyer. So that's great news. You can now incorporate that in the contract for sale and purchase. All right, she has another great question. When you're working with a buyer and the buyer broker agreement is in the buyer's name, but they decide to purchase in the name of an LLC, are you protected? If they change that, do we need to change it on the buyer broker agreement? How does that work? How does it protect us as far as being paid? All right, now remember, this is straight from the buyer broker agreement. Compensation. Buyer's compensation is earned when during the term of this agreement or any renewal or extension, the consumer or and this is important, any persons acting for or on the behalf of the consumer contracts to acquire real property as specified in this agreement, or defaults to any contract to acquire property. So, an LLC or an entity which is acting on behalf of the buyer, you would be covered as far as compensation. All right, that's a lot of information, might be a little confusing. We are going to attach the forms and we are happy to take all your questions. I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.